Chapter 7 of Nicholas, a Manhattan Christmas Story by Carroll Moore. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Christmas Eve in Chelsea.
Will you ride down to the night before Christmas country in our orange taxi, or must we leave you at the Pennsylvania station?
Said Anne Carraway to John Moon as they came out of the Favorite, loaded down with presents.
I'd love to come to Chelsea with Nicholas,
John Moon replied,
but Mother is expecting me home early to spend Christmas Eve with her, so please drop me at the station.
When they walked into the Mirror before visiting the Favorite, Nicholas discovered that the Mirror wasn't a looking-glass at all, but a big candy shop with all sorts of surprise presents. John Moon handed him a package of chocolate cigarettes, and when Anne Carraway said,
"Choose something, Nicholas,"
he pointed to a glass jar filled with red and white striped bull's eyes.
"Now let's fill a big box for other people,"
said Anne Carraway. They had great fun choosing. First, a layer of lollipops. Next, a layer of red and yellow barley sugar horses and elephants and camels. Then a deep layer of sticks and stumps of red and white and pink Christmas candy. After that came gumdrops, marshmallows, and striped peppermint sticks. On top there were ever so many little surprises, no two alike, with candy canes slipped in between, and in the crooks of the canes little round cakes of chocolate frosted with tiny white sugar beads, and last of all, heaps of red checkerberries. The box had to be kept right side up, so after Anne Carraway had paid for it, receiving in exchange for her money a handful of little silver watches and fiddles, pipes, trumpets, and steamboats, they put it in an orange taxi while they shopped at the Favorite. All the presents at the Favorite cost either 5 cents or 10 cents, and with a jingling bag of new dimes and nickels, there was no waiting for change. In less than 10 flashes they had bought 50 presents, with 10 gaily decorated boxes to put them in, and piled them high on the floor of the orange taxi. There was just room to squeeze in themselves. Down Fifth Avenue they rode on a flash of orange light from the traffic tower, and turning west by the Waldorf on a flash of green, they were soon coasting rapidly down the long runway of the Long Island side of the Pennsylvania station. As he leaped from the taxi to run for his train, John Moon drew from his pocket the parcel tied with red cord, and tossing it into Anne Carraway's lap, he called,
"I guess what it is, Nicholas. Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night."
And waving a trumpet and a Scotch plaid notebook, he raced past the eager redcaps and disappeared inside the big station.
"I like John Moon,"
said Nicholas.
"What does he do, Anne Carraway?"
"He writes news for a newspaper, but sometimes a story or a poem steals into his mind, and he writes it down in a book of his own. That's why he wanted a notebook for a present."
"There's the post office,"
cried Nicholas as they turned south on 8th Avenue.
"Please go slow,"
he called to the driver, and leaning out of the taxi window, he saw letters and packages coming out of every one of the 11 front doors of the big post office.
"The nicest presents of all are the Christmas letters from everywhere," said
Anne Carraway.
"Read what it says across the front of the post office, just above the pillars. Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds."
"I'd like to be a postman,"
said Nicholas.
"It sounds wonderful."
"We're coming to the night before Christmas country,"
Anne Carraway exclaimed at 24th Street.
"Prepare for surprises, Nicholas. There's Lucky's townhouse. She lives in one of the old Chelsea cottages, with an iron portico in front and a little garden behind, but her real garden, where the tulips bloom, is out in the country."
On 10th Avenue they met the first surprise, a boy on horseback, waving a lantern and a red flag as he rode just ahead to clear the way for the locomotive of a long freight train. This was not the kind of locomotive you see anywhere else. It was made to look like a funny little house, in the days when horses were afraid of the old wood-burning kind of engine with its big spark drum and cow-catcher.
We call him the Paul Revere of Chelsea, but the New York Central Railroad calls him a dummy boy,
said Anne Carraway.
You will hear his trains go by at all hours of the day or night, Nicholas, and you will hear all the big steamers that put in or sail out from Chelsea docks, and all the little tugs that screech alongside them, and the whistles and the foghorns blowing from the ferry boats crossing North River on stormy nights and mornings.
I'm glad I came here with you, Anne Carraway,
said Nicholas as they rode up past London Terrace, a row of old houses with deep dooryards in front and gardens at the back which looked into the gardens of Chelsea cottages. At the oldest fruit shop in Chelsea they stopped for a basket of red apples, which George Bimero assured Anne Carraway came from upstate.
There's Joe Starr at the window,
cried Anne Carraway as the orange taxi drew up before one of the old red brick houses in West 20th Street.
Merry Christmas, Joe,
she called.
We can't move for the presents.
I'm coming,
shouted Joe, and a moment later he had gathered up every single one of the presents and was climbing the stairs to the Christmas room, leaving Nicholas and Anne Carraway to follow on behind. Joe Starr had been so intent on the presents that he didn't even see Nicholas until he turned to greet Anne Carraway with a
Joyeux Noël, ma chère tante.
Oh, Joe,
said Anne Carraway with laughing eyes.
Here's Nicholas come for Christmas. My nephew, Joe Starr from Maine, Nicholas.
Joyeux Noël, Nicolas,
responded Joe Starr, shaking hands so cordially that Nicholas felt entirely at home, untied his muffler, and ran over to the fireplace to warm his hands.
This accounts for the mysterious hamper I found on the steps as I came in,
said Joe Starr.
It is marked, Merry Christmas to Nicholas and Joe Starr from Lucky, per order of Brownie. I didn't venture to unpack the hamper until I knew who Nicholas was.
Suppose you and Nicholas unpack it now, while I slip into another dress,
said Anne Carraway, and she left the two boys alone in the Christmas room. It was a big square room with two windows overlooking Chelsea Square. There was a Christmas tree in one window, and red candles burned on the old mahogany desk which stood in the other. When Anne Carraway came back, she was wearing a cherry-colored dress and black velvet slippers with sparkling buckles. Taking a wreath of partridge berries from the heap of presents Joe Starr had piled up on the floor, she placed it on a pewter plate under the pine boughs on the dresser.
A bit of the Maine woods, Nicholas,
she called gaily, and then she spied the little supper table in front of the fire.
I've been saying, little table appear, all the time I've been dressing,
she cried.
And here it is, with quite the most delectable Christmas Eve supper I've ever seen.
And seating herself in the big wicker chair Joe Starr had placed for her, Anne Carraway took a second look at the wishing table, and she saw a plump little roast duck, a mold of red currant jelly, olives, bacon and celery sandwiches cut in three-cornered shapes, thimble biscuits light as feathers, and a round Dutch cheese marked N with hard toasted crackers beside it. On the dresser were some very special Christmas cakes marked N, A, C, J, M, T, and B, a mince pie marked J, S, and two gingerbread boys.
We unpacked only one layer of the hamper,
said Joe Starr.
Then we came to a big sign, Go no further. Save for breakfast Christmas morning.
I don't see what else there can be,
sighed Anne Carraway.
There's everything and more here.
But you must both be hungry. Let's begin.
I'm nearly always hungry,
said Nicholas as Joe Starr began to carve the duck. It was a merry little supper round that wishing table, for Joe Starr cracked jokes and told funny stories, sometimes in English, sometimes in French. Not that he knew the language very well, but he liked to use all the French he knew.
What do you do, Joe Starr?
Asked Nicholas.
I go up to the moon in a large balloon, Nicholas, old boy. I take her up wherever I can, but I'm out of the Navy now, looking for Captain Kidd's treasure here in New York.
I can show you just where Captain Kidd used to live,
cried Nicholas.
It is marked on my map. Can I help you look for treasure, Joe Starr?
You certainly can, Nicholas, old boy. We'll have a high old time treasure hunting up and down Wall Street and Maiden Lane, although they do say Gardener's Island is the place to search.
When they had all eaten as much as they could, the wishing table disappeared. And as they sat talking before the fire, Anne Carroway suddenly remembered Nicholas's present and gave it to him. Untying the red cord, Nicholas drew from its wrapping a flat red book with "A Visit from St. Nicholas" printed on the cover.
It's a jolly book,
said he.
You read it to us, Anne Carroway.
Yes, do read it,
urged Joe Starr, and settled himself down in a big armchair before the fire.
I haven't heard it for almost a year.
So Anne Carroway began to read.
'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced through their heads. And Mamma in her kerchief, and I in my cap, had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap.
Anne Carroway stopped short, and she and Nicholas watched Joe Starr open-mouthed. He was squatting on the hearth, balancing a live coal over the bowl of his pipe and drawing at it furiously. Puffing clouds of smoke, Joe Starr tossed the coal back into the fire and walked over to the window. Anne Carroway read on.
When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters, and threw up the sash.
The window rattled. Nicholas and Anne Carroway turned in their chairs. Joe Starr was hanging out of the window.
Nicholas,
he called softly.
Nicholas, old boy.
Nicholas ran over to the window.
The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave a luster of midday to objects below.
On such a night 100 years ago,
continued Joe Starr,
St. Nicholas came to Chelsea. It was a countryman of yours, Nicholas, a ruddy-faced Dutchman who lived on the old place, who gave Clement Moore the eye sign. And Clement Moore, I'm dead certain, deserted his library, left that remarkable Hebrew dictionary of his, he made the first one, and all his Oriental books, and took a walk around his grandfather's Chelsea farm with the Dutchman, who told him everything he knew about St. Nicholas. There were no rows of houses in Chelsea then. It was like the open country, and they could walk all over the place, from 8th Avenue to the river, and cross lots from 19th Street to 24th Street. You see the church tower over in Chelsea Square, Nicholas? Just beyond it, on the hill, facing the river, stood the old three-storied stone house where Clement Moore was born. It had a cupola and wide chimneys on top, and on this side of it was a broad porch with a roof shaded by a tall tree, most conveniently placed for climbing in and out of windows.
Nicholas chuckled and gave Joe Starr a poke in the ribs.
There was another porch in front of the house, with a high flight of steps leading up to it, where the children used to sit and watch the boats on the river. But Clement Moore came back to the side porch after his walk with the Dutchman, you may be sure, and stood there in the moonlight, looking across the fields and orchards he had already begun to give away.
Then he lifted the latch very cautiously and went in, put on his cap, and sat down by the fire to watch for St. Nicholas.
Your little red book tells the story of St. Nicholas's visit, just as Clement Moore wrote it down as a present for his own little girls that Christmas Eve, never dreaming that he was writing our American Christmas poem. The children liked their father's present so much that they showed it to some of the many visitors who were always coming to stay at Chelsea. One of them copied it into her album, and when she went home, she lived in Troy, New York, gave it to the editor of the Troy Sentinel, who published it with an old woodcut of St. Nicholas the very next Christmas, December 23rd, 1823. Other newspapers copied it, and the boys and girls all over the country soon knew the poem by heart, and have been repeating it on Christmas Eve ever since. How's that for a true story, Nicholas?
It's a good one, Joe Starr. Tell me some more about that old house on the hill. What was it like inside?
I was never inside, Nicholas, old boy. The old house and the hill where it stood disappeared years ago, 1853. I saw a picture of it hanging in the real estate office round the corner. It reminded me of another old grey house on a hill in Portland, Maine, the house where I was born. It has a cupola, too, and it looks across an arm of Portland Harbor to Cape Elizabeth. My grandfather was always walking about his old place. Clement Moore's grandfather, Captain Thomas Clark, had a long record of hard fighting in the French and Indian Wars. When he was retired, he decided to spend his old age in America, so he bought this tract of land 3 miles from City Hall and called it Chelsea, after the old hospital near London. His house was burned over his head in his last illness, and Clement Moore's grandmother, Mistress Molly Clark, built the house St. Nicholas visited and lived in it for many years. When she died, she willed it to her son-in-law, Bishop Benjamin Moore, who was Clement Moore's father.
Clement Moore's father was the second Bishop of New York and a rector of Old Trinity,
said Anne Carraway, coming over to the window.
There was no school for bishops and clergymen in this country in his time, so Clement Moore gave one of his fields and an orchard and helped build one. There it stands out in Chelsea Square. Up the street a little way, there is an old gray stone church with a high tower, which he also helped to build after first giving the land.
Is it named for St. Nicholas?
Asked Nicholas.
No, for St. Peter. No one dreamed in the days when the church was built that this part of New York would ever be called the night before Christmas country.
Joe Starr drew in his head.
I haven't heard a single carol,
he said with a sigh.
Is it too late?
We will be just in time to hear the carol sung at Calvary Church if we start right off,
said Anne Carraway.
The church is lighted only with candles, and it is very lovely at this hour. We'll walk around the corner and see the moon over Gramercy Park afterward. Would you like to go, Nicholas?
No, thank you. I'm sleepy,
said Nicholas.
I'll stay by the fire.
You'd better turn in, Nicholas, old boy,
said Joe Starr.
I'll take the next watch.
Nicholas hopped into bed, and before the street door closed behind Anne Carraway and Joe Starr, he was fast asleep. End of chapter 7.